Well, the capability really came from the West, truth be told. We quit doing it, and they have a huge cost advantage. You know, when they were talking about technologies that they were might limit the export of, and one of the things they talked about was hard rock conversion, and it was like, really? We actually started that.
Righto, Money Minders, Lithium Spectacular coming your way, boys. You know the best place to charge a lithium battery?
Tell me, Matthew.
In a charging station, probably in a grounded camp. They can put them in. And because, you know what, because they don't build on the plan, they design the plan.
Unbelievable.
And then they build. They design, concept, construct, mate, absolute experts. Mate, you can have a look at this joint. This is Subiaco on a mine site. And you see Grounded Zone Katie Dorr walking around here. I swear that is the animated version of Katie Dorr. It's been modelled off her. But you can, mate, unbelievable quality. That is what you will see in real life once the Grounded team unleash their expertise on you.
Camp is the wrong word. We need a new word for what these are, because this is revolutionised accommodation on a mine site.
Resort,
village. Yeah, it's got to make work in there happy.
City dwellings in the bush.
Love it.
Designed, concept, and constructed by the Grounded Group.
Go Grounded.
Mate, did they build their own building
They probably did.
down West Perth?
I think they did. Yeah,
Yeah.
definitely designed it.
Love to know that. Anyway, back to lithium. Mr. Joe Lowry, Mr. Lithium, come back. Sorry I couldn't join us on this one. I hope you gave him my regards. Great fella. And what's the vibe? What is the vibe?
The vibe is that we want to be counter-cyclical, Matthew, and as we sort of discuss in the show, lithium is very beaten up, no surprise to anyone, and why not have a chat about it with none other than Mr. Lithium. We covered everything under the sun in lithium world, from the M&A that we've seen in recent times, the supply-demand dynamic, and the conversation really came off the back of his awesome write-up on how the Chinese have dominated the lithium space in the battery metals and battery making arena for the last 5-10 years. So I think that's all you kind of need to know for this one.
So counter-cyclical, you're saying find something that's gone down shitloads and hope it goes back up.
Yeah, exactly. In a nutshell.
Righto, let's get into Mr. Lithium.
Mr. Lithium, we are very excited to have you back on the show. It's been well over a year now, and with where lithium markets have been and the kind of general sentiment around the space, we thought it'd be a great time to get you back on the show. And then you actually published a little piece on LinkedIn, The Lithium Art of War. And yeah, I never thought I'd lead in the podcast with a bit of Sun Tzu, but I think it's quite fitting given your paper. So there was some fascinating sort of points, and it sort of puts into perspective the rise of China and the kind of falling off of the West. But yeah, keen to start the podcast to understand what was the inspiration to put into words what has happened over the past 15, 20 years in the lithium arena.
Well, as a proud American, I bewail our falling off the lithium cliff over the years, when I started, everything that went to the battery industry was from the U.S., mined in the U.S., processed in the U.S., and that was, it was short-lived. It was only 3 or 4 years because we did not have the capacity at the time and had to make a transition from hard rock to brine. But I really tire of the whining on the U.S. Well, I won't even limit it to the U.S., Europe too, and frame it more broadly, North America and Europe, about China's unfair competition and how they've dominated. They were terrible at all of this for the better part of 15 years, but they stuck with their program. I can go back as recently as 2009, 2010, nobody would buy Chinese material unless it was low-end stuff. The European grease guys would buy their hydroxide. But the Koreans and the Japanese, who at that time still were dominant in the battery supply chain, they wouldn't touch Chinese material. Ganfeng didn't even start making carbonate and hydroxide until the last 15 years. So they existed for over a decade before they even were in a financial position to put the capital in to convert. So it's been an interesting rise, and highlighted Ganfeng. I could have just as easily talked about Tianqi, although I don't think their story is quite as interesting as Ganfeng's. But then BYD also. I met BYD before I met Ganfeng. I met BYD 25 years ago, and was supplying them carbonate and cathode materials, which we made it a joint venture in Japan, and I saw that rise because their beginnings were very, very humble as well. And CATL
that's well before they're doing EVs, right?
Oh yeah, this was all. They went up into the hinterland and got a bunch of teenage girls to make crummy batteries by hand, and literally, I mean, they put their capital into testing equipment because back then, and this is really fascinating. The first time I went to their facility, they were bragging about how making things by hand was actually a strength because they could pivot faster than Sony could. But they also were honest enough to say that most of their batteries couldn't be sold to the international cell phone market, which back then was two names you guys probably you might be familiar with, Nokia and Motorola. They were the big cell phone guys back then. I mean, this was after the Gordon Gekko shoe case.
We're not that young, Joe. We remember those. I reckon we both owned one of them.
Definitely.
And the United States did not have, I mean, myself, when I lived in Asia, I had 3 cell phones. I had a China cell phone because roaming wasn't really a thing early on. So I had a China cell phone for trips to China. I was living in Japan. I had a Japanese cell phone, and I had a U.S. cell phone. And my U.S. cell phone had a nickel metal hydride battery back then. So it was pre-lithium.
Yeah, and looking at the market caps of these companies, I think just to state the numbers so people really appreciate it. Like BYD is, in Aussie dollar terms, $215 billion. So 2/3 of that to get the US market cap. And cattle is about the same. Like these companies they're bigger than BHP now. It's remarkable the rise and rise. I want to hone in on cattle for a second, Joe, because the really interesting part that's stuck out to me from your writing was on their appreciation of vertical integration and what they learnt in the latest wild ride that we saw in that 21-22 boom. And they, went on to purchase these lepidolite operations. How do you kind of put that in perspective and, think about how they might utilize those operations and the learnings they've got from that going forward over the next sort of 10, 20 years?
I think it's even broader than just what CATL did, but to go with the question, in the 2022 run-up, they had, to try to keep their share, they had a program where they were guaranteeing that the lithium price in the formula would be basically the equivalent of 20,000 pricing, which they lost a lot of money on as the price continued to rise. And these guys are very smart people and they move fast. They didn't like what was happening. They realized that if price was just going to keep going up, that they could exploit what were very well-known resources. They just weren't economic in any other lithium cycle. And it goes way beyond that, though. The lepidolite came on, and then all the African move. And they figured out, I think, really quickly how they're going to manage the next cycle. Because there's layers of, the cost curve. Your last lithium guest talked about the concept of the steepening cost curve. And that is certainly true. And now I think that is going to be the buffer on significant price runs in the future, because all the Chinese converters know where this stuff is, whether it's DSO or 2.5 or whatever the grades are. Has such a diversity of, they have decent lithium and they have a lot of garbage. But when the price runs up to 35,000, then 40,000, and then all the way up to 80, you can use any of that stuff. And I think that the last cycle taught all of China, all of their lithium supply chain, how they'll react next time. And it seemed quick in 2022, 2023. It'll be quicker next time. But I also believe there will be a shortage and there will be a price spike, because on the other hand of what CATL's done, and I think there's fair consensus that there's a lot of misinformation out there. If you go back to 2022, CATL was pumping the sodium ion battery and how great it was going to be and the share it was going to get. And they knew the limitations of that, but it was rhetoric that scared the West. And that's the game. They've done a great job of disincentivizing capital from chasing what I would call mediocre projects.
No mediocre projects for MMS. All class. Boys, ask me anything about MMS and mining.
Does open pit mining have a relationship with underground mining, Matthew?
Interesting question. Well, let's consider that Black Cat have just taken pretty much saying Myree's going underground. Now, if we can link that back to MMS, their superior performance at Myree, getting there quicker, obviously leaving it in schmicko condition, all the bloody walls are just ready to punch portals in, I would say, yes, MMS have pretty much, Black Cat have said, holy shit, we can go underground now. We weren't expecting to be here. Thank you, MMS. That is pretty much what's happening. So answer to your question, JD, yes, if you mine the open pit quick, at a superior quality, yes, it makes your underground better and sooner.
If I understand you right, Matthew, that means earlier cash flow for you, the mining company.
Well, mate, you probably just you're just getting double the cash flow because the pit's still going.
You didn't sterilise the ore body, you looked after it.
Twice as much cash flow, 5 times as quicker, and your share price goes up like Black Cat when MMS is your trusted mining partner.
Seems like a no-brainer to me.
Oh, mate, isn't it? What? Let's get back into Big Joe.
Just to tease that out even more, Joe, like what's the economic incentive for them to do so?
Well, take BYD and CATL together. They're almost half of global lithium demand. 2 companies. We never had that situation before. If you look at 1.2 terawatt hours total last year, roughly, and BYD and CATL being half of that, and I'm a little more conservative on my lithium intensity than your guest from Singapore. But any way you calculate it, they are far and away the dominant purchaser of lithium values in whatever form, whether it's cells, cathode, whatever. And they have every incentive in the world to run a mine or a couple of mines at a loss. If you're buying 300,000 or 400,000 tons of LCE and you take a beating on 40, 50, 60,000 tons, but you keep your other purchases $8, $9, $10 below what they would run up to if you weren't doing that, it's not rocket science.
If we go back once more, Joe, to really set the foundation for this rise of these Chinese companies, one of the other points you make and others have sort of made, and you see it across all industries, but you know very obviously in the EV and the battery sort of space, is the way in which government and industry kind of mesh and work together, and they kind of coordinate to achieve these strategic goals. when you look at like BYD and cattle now, do you see them as being able to kind of run their own race, and the government has kind of just tapped them in line when that needs to kind of happen, but they're free to sort of do so? Or how do you view the government and enterprise sort of relationship today?
I think you just phrased it very well. They let them run until they have something to say. And I think you saw that. I don't know if it was the March meeting 2 years ago, or when Xi Jinping told Robin Zung that he ought to be careful about going to the U.S. and you needed to be dealing with friendly entities. That I'd have to go back and Google that article, but it was pretty clear. And I think everybody knows the Jack Ma story. That's not a lithium story, but they turned Jack Ma into a verb. You get Jack Mod. So I think
there's been a bit of a change lately, though, right? The attitude towards successful business people is, I don't know, it's kind of altered a little bit, and Jack Ma has, been the face of that. You've seen him in public again, which you didn't see for a number of years.
I think that's optics. I think
it's all optics, right?
Yeah, I not to be completely cynical, but having lived there, having watched it, knowing some of these people, you don't want to be the richest guy in China. You want to be 3 or 4. When I lived there, there was 2 or 3 years where the person named the richest person in China was in jail the next year.
I used to love that saying that the fastest way to die in China is to become a billionaire.
Yeah, but
I mean, probably offended an entire nation there, so maybe I retract that.
I admire what China's done. I mean, that is my bottom line from what I put up on LinkedIn, is that I think that it's very arrogant of North America or Europe to think they can do in a short period of time what it literally took China decades to do, with all the support put in place. I hired a lot of people when I lived in China, and I always said I would much rather have to pick from a pool of Chinese talent than a pool of American talent.
It's a tremendously industrious nation, right? And
everybody wanted to get ahead. There are nuances to how you manage Chinese young people. They do probably need a little more stroking in terms of having a lot of I managed different age groups, and the young people were a little more aggressive, but the people that had mom and dad went through the Cultural Revolution, they had a respect for authority that you didn't really see so much in the U.S. at the time. But the 50 years of communism, I used to say when I was living there, didn't beat the entrepreneurial spirit out of the Chinese people.
That point is often a bit lost in the commentary around China. Is just the relative competitiveness that does exist amongst the centralized government.
It was the old saw, especially in the early days of cathode, was once a company started making decent cathode, then one of their lead guys would quit, go down the street and open up another cathode supplier. It was just people wanted to be their own boss. And I admired the hard work. The work ethic was impressive. And so I may not like Mr. Xi much, but I admire the Chinese people and will continue to do so.
The supreme art of war is to subdue the enemy without fighting. How does this relate to lithium, Joe?
Well, it really does. And not to hype my podcast, but if you go back and listen to the episode Not Lost in Translation with Li Langbing and Wang Xiaoshen, I mean, they talked about the early days. They had to deal with everybody. They were the supplicants. Never, there was never a discouraging word said, but they knew where they wanted to go. And that was one of the things that I always told people that were dealing with them, because I made a presentation at Panorama Minero event last October, and I showed gang fence slides that they had presented to me in 2005 about wanting to become a strong domestic supplier. And then they wanted to become a regional player. And this is not in carbonate and hydroxide. This was in the downstream, because they had enough capital to have a metal plant, and they had enough capital to try to do butyl lithium. But I think if you look at the three companies I highlight in that article, they all started off with technology from other people. I mean, CATL's technology came from Japan, or ATL did, and then CATL was an offshoot of that. And there was always the Chinese concept of, they would always say, big brother, I need help. And it wasn't until they got to where they are today that they now publicly still show the humility, but those guys are very confident in who they are and where they're going, and they're certainly not afraid of anybody outside of China.
On the conversion front, just how many years ahead, realistically, would they be if the West tried to replicate some of that capability?
Well, the capability really came from the West, truth be told. They learned how to convert spodumene from us. We didn't learn. Now, we quit doing it, and they have a huge cost advantage. But that's something that I always push back on, is that when they were talking about technologies that they were might limit the export of, and one of the things they talked about was hard rock conversion, and it was like, really? We actually started that. So, but I take the question seriously. I look at Tesla, Corpus Christi. They announced that the calciner was turning, but they haven't. I haven't seen a lot of announcements about the great quality product that they're producing, because it's not happening, as far as I know. I don't want to get into trouble if they have been sneaking product to cathode makers, but I think I would know. I do think we're more hamstrung on the permitting side, the financing side. And I think it's probably, I would say, the gap in simply lithium, we can't catch up. And we shouldn't even try to catch up. But we do need our own supply chain too. And that's just because when I was there and watching early days, when I was first making trips once a month between 2000 and 2005, before I moved to China from Japan, there were not that many converters. And now I don't have any idea how many dozen conversion facilities there are now, but you had easy money when they were trying to develop the West. The regional banks were propping up people that weren't making a dime for years, and we don't have that kind of situation in America. So I'd say that's as much the problem as just the pure technology. Because I can get on the phone and call a bunch of people that live within a few hours of where I'm sitting that could get a converter built if they had the money. And they could put it into operation relatively quickly if they could get it permitted, if all the things that you have to do besides just the engineering.
So to your point on us needing to have our own supply chain in the West and needing to compete, what do you make of the IRA and where that kind of stands now and what that kind of looks like, and any other sort of similar government type package to kind of chip away at China's dominance?
Well, I am heartened that we are building Thacker Pass, and all the issues that were in the way have been surmounted, and that's being built. And that was a huge loan. I mean, like $2.3 billion is nothing to sneeze at, and then it required some other additional financing, and that's all in place. I think it's being well supported by the local governments, the national governments, but that's one 40,000 ton plant that can expand to 80. It's a beginning. The real open question in North America is, well, there's more than one, but how fast do the Exxons and Equinors move? Rio Tinto put real money into their lithium effort. I'm not saying that the oil companies aren't willing to put real money in, but so far it's been kind of a slow roll as they learn, and they're not. It isn't a Manhattan Project speed scenario. Is probably the kindest way to put it.
I don't think a company like Rio is capable of a Manhattan type style or speed of operation. In all fairness to them, it's just not their sort of MO.
Oh, and I was thrilled that Rio put the capital in, but I've said on my podcast, I've said it in writing, I've said it on X, I don't think they speed this up. I think that they have the balance sheet to do all the projects that they own, but they don't have the skills yet. And I, heard a recent guest talk about all the skills that Arcadium had. Well, I'll just personalize it to my experience. I left FMC Lithium in 2012. 10 years later, they were producing the same amount of LCEs as they were when I left. That's after announcing expansions. That's after a lot of rhetoric, and they didn't execute. Some of it could be laid on to financial issues, but that to me was more of an excuse. And I think Rio's already made a huge mistake in keeping that management intact. They didn't get it done as Livent. They didn't get it done as separately as Allchem, and they didn't get it done as Arcadium. So why do you want to keep the same management intact who didn't perform, who just had a portfolio of really good assets? And I actually said that to Rio's head of battery metals at BMO. I had a meeting with him and said, you guys have already made mistake number one.
Didn't they make Paul Graves the head of CEO of Lithium? I think he's a CEO. Of
Yeah.
Lithium. Yeah.
I like Paul. Paul's a nice guy.
Yeah.
But let's look at you should judge people by the record. And I made the statement when Arcadium was formed. I made the statement that it made sense to have Paul run it because he's a banker and he'll be able to sell it. And he did that, and they should have thanked him and moved on.
What did you make of the price tag to just speak to the financial aspect of that deal?
I think Paul's a banker, and I think Paul got a good price. I don't think it was as bad as some of Rio Tinto's other deals, maybe. But I don't want to go too far down
That's
that
a
road.
high bar to beat.
Well, that's hence the comment.
I've got
Fair
to,
enough.
I mean, before we even kind of venture into some of the grounds of the deal landscape and everything like that, I feel like maybe even the most topical thing to talk about is like the last few days we've just been watching the lithium equities in particular here just absolutely crater. I mean, today as we wake up and we're recording, it might be a bit of a bounce, but it almost seems like there's a really huge response to tariffs as they relate to the lithium mining equities that we have. Like Pilbara Angora, like, you know, PLS now, they call themselves, not Pilbara Minerals, PLS, they're like $1.20 odd, but 26 yesterday at some point. It's just, amazing. And Mins is
I'm in at 31 and 34 cents, so I'm still hanging in.
So is this all like is this tariffs? Is that what this is? Like, what are the like? What's
no? I think the sentiment in lithium is worse in 2025 than it was in the dark days of less than $4,000 a ton that SQM and Orocobre sold into China at during 2020. In some cases, that wasn't their average price, but it got that low, and you're still in the 10,000 range now. But the sentiment is still so negative. You know, 2 years ago at BMO, every uranium company was talking about they might have lithium, and gold guys were the same. Now it's the opposite. Every lithium guy's like, hey, maybe we'll drill for uranium. I think it's just the overall, the market's down, and it's easy to be negative on it. Lithium used to track Tesla, several years ago. And right now, I mean, people that drive Tesla are getting spit out. Their cars getting spit on at stoplights because everybody's mad at Elon. So, right now, America's, going through a
moment,
interesting time.
Well, some of it there must be kind of a part of it that is related to expectations of, like, in recessionary conditions, like where's the discretionary spend on lithium coming from? Plus, combine it with how much of the the best demand would have come from the US, and all of a sudden the tariffs might make those individual projects or growth forecasts kind of uneconomic for the time being, and then some short term, so some of it must be a factor of what is a response to the tariffs and kind of recessionary kind of conjecture. But do you think that in the long run that kind of just gets washed out?
I think, look what happened today. The market roared in America.
Tariffs paused
after. Yeah, I mean, well, that's just
not on China.
My entire point is that give it 90 days to 6 months to see what Trump does next. I don't think lithium's suffering more than the other stocks. I mean, I sold some Apple at 236 several weeks ago and bought it back in 180. So I'm using this time to adjust my portfolio, shall we say.
If we look at the supply side of the supply demand dynamic, how do you currently sort of think about, say, over the next kind of 3 years, your kind of view versus consensus on projects that can get up and running? Are you a bit more kind of bullish, or do you think the consensus is a bit lofty? Where do you see that at the moment, Joe?
Well, tell me what you think consensus is. That would be for point one. I think that let's look at South America. Aramet, with great fanfare, shipped 40 tons. How many weeks ago? They're struggling. People don't like to talk about that, but it's hard bringing these projects on. And Aramet wasn't really sure of how to run their DLE at scale, I think, and they're learning on the job. people love to talk about Zijin and 3Qs. How much have they produced? I think there's going to continue to be a struggle in 25, 26 from some of the projects out there. And then you got the smaller projects that can't get financed. I mean, if you go back to the art of war bit, that's another one of the benefits of misinformation and misdirection. As asset prices go lower, the Chinese can pick them up cheaper, to the extent that they're allowed to do that. If it doesn't get, you take the geopolitics, which are also a factor. But ultimately, CATL is going to pay the price for this, because they can't, as the market goes from 850,000 when they started this whole thing with lepidolite to 2 million, their ability to use a couple of lepidolite mines to control the narrative is going to be tougher. Although, as I said earlier, they've also identified what projects are economic at what prices. And it's really instructive to see what capacity came off when price got to 40, what project came off when price got to 30. You're going to see the reverse if price goes up. And price never should have gotten to 40,000 in my opinion, but price can't stay where it is. Look at the financials of all the lithium companies, and how many adjustments can you make to EBITDA to try to make the story look good?
Depends how creative you are, Joe.
Yeah,
I know a few creative lithium companies.
wouldn't be the only sector that chucks in a few adjustments to EBITDA. What did you make of the SQM comments? I think about a month ago now, they sort of forecast 25 to be flattish, and that's not what some people wanted to hear. And then they sort of spoke to a bit of a pickup. How do you kind of weight what those guys kind of say? What's your view on them?
I don't think price is going to break out in 2025 either. But if you look at the history of SQM, they've always been very conservative about how they talked about price. And I think that continues. So I always take the price forecast rhetoric with a grain of salt, but I don't disagree with them either. In this time, I think there's enough lithium values rolling around in China that price doesn't break out. I think it'll be higher at the end of the year than it was at the beginning of the year, but I don't think I think that's a small number. And I think you get your spike, and I've said this publicly several times so far this year, I think Q4 2026, you'll start to see a little bit of a run. Look at the gigawatt hours that are being made. Look at the Western rhetoric is all about EVs haven't grown as much as some people expected in the United States. The United States isn't that big of a deal right now in the EV world. And China continues to go from strength to strength, and their exports are growing, and BESS is exceeding everybody's expectations. So it's all about the gigawatt hours or terawatt hours now.
So in that kind of subdued environment, obviously you kind of mentioned there that the potential for Chinese, given geopolitics, to scoop up, but we have seen a couple other deals which I'm keen to get your take on. Pilbara or PLS, a company we know you're quite supportive of, went to Latin America. They went to Brazil and scooped up Latin resources. What was your kind of perspective on that deal?
Did you just go to
I
South
thought it was
America?
a good. I'll be there in 2 weeks.
2 weeks, gotcha. Yeah.
Yeah, I'll be flying back 2 weeks from tonight. So I like the Latin story. Sigma's done a surprisingly good job. And I only say surprisingly because people had low expectations on Brazil. I mean, if you look at the the lithium world tends to adopt change slowly, shall we say, and Brazil's really performed better. And there's multiple projects down there. And I literally haven't been in Brazil since 1996. So I go to South America a couple times a year, but the last time I was in Brazil was to try to get the nuclear ban lifted they had. And we used to have to get a license every time we sold into Brazil. And it was a cumbersome process. So I'm happy to be going back to Brazil. I think Dale made a really good decision. Dale's a very methodical guy. And I think some messages were also being sent there that, hey, it isn't just WA.
Yeah, well, that message was clearly sent when they removed their name from being Pilbara to PLS, but that came later. But it's also a statement about
Isn't it PLS Global?
I can't remember. You're probably right, but yeah.
Just emphasises the point.
It's also a statement about their probable views on capital intensity and OPEX of the relative jurisdictions too.
Yes, I think Brazil's interesting too because they're likely to have the full-blown supply chain. BYD is very active down there, and we'll see what happens whether they have a full-blown supply chain before America does. It could happen.
That'd be quite something to behold. There was one more bit of insight I wanted to get from you that was kind of company specific, and it's in the sort of Wesfarmers SQM joint venture that we see here, because we really struggle to get good info. But we saw on the M&A front rumors that Indian groups were looking to buy a sort of 20% stake off SQM's portion. What's your sort of latest info that you've got on Mount Holland and the refinery that they're doing, and any potential insight on the deal?
I can't really speak to exactly what's going on at Mount Holland, but I can tell you from talking to some of the larger industrial companies in India that they have a real interest in. When a company comes and says we're going to spend in the range of $5 to $15 billion to try to go across the energy storage system supply chain. And to do that, to have confidence, we want to be vertically integrated. And it's a credible entity. And I've talked to multiple entities in India. I can't speak to their specific interest in SQM because I actually told them they ought to go to Argentina, but we'll see. I think it's completely plausible, and I think SQM got outside of their knitting by going to WA, and I think it's been a tough slog. And maybe when I'm in Western Australia in the not too distant future, I will get better information. But that's just been a tough slog for both Wesfarmers and SQM.
Totally. I mean, it was such an interesting move by SQM to come to WA, the hard rock, and in some ways kind of forced upon them by the dynamics of operating in Chile.
They could have gone to Argentina.
They could have, yeah. That's
and done what they know how to do.
Valid point, for sure. Yeah. It is funny to look at that.
Although they had one excursion into Argentina that didn't work out too well, and Gangfeng bought them out. But I think they would have had much greater success figuring out Argentina brine versus Atacama brines rather than going to hard rock. And I think Mr. Ramos drank a little bit of the Chris Ellison Kool-Aid, and they'll pay the price for it.
It's a big price to pay, that one.
I didn't say this was a happy story.
There's not too many happy stories in the lithium land at the moment.
You think
yeah, I know you guys like to pan lithium. It's been tough, but what other and I will pander to you, Jonas, and say commodity has grown 10x in a decade.
I'd take the other side, Judd. I think, from our perspective, we're more excited than we have been in a long time on lithium because it's trading so hard in the cost curve. I think there's the realization though that our assets in our backyard here in WA perhaps don't sit on the cost curve where we previously might have thought they sit.
You're right.
It's a bitter pill to kind of swallow for a lot of folks down here, but it throws up sort of opportunities. And I guess another point I was curious to get your take on is like Greenbushes. It's tied up in a gnarly kind of ownership structure, but there comes a point in time where if you're looking at WA assets, the ones in our backyard here, that Greenbushes is certainly one of the better ones there. So how do you kind of view that, and how do you view picking out assets that sit low in the cost curve in a commodity or a specialty chemical, as you kind of say, when it's really beaten up?
Well, I'm glad we're trying to speak each other's languages here. Well, Greenbushes is the best operating hard rock asset in the world. I mean, it's not what it once was, but it's still head and shoulders above the other from a cost perspective. The problem with Greenbushes, from my perspective, is the convoluted ownership, and it would be better placed in one company's hands. That's not the case. I got to meet Ivan from IGO in Florida in February. Likeable guy. I am, hoping that things turn around for them. And but it first of all, having Albemarle, who is zigged when they should have zagged and zagged when they should have zigged for the last 7 or 8 years, that's tough. Tanchi's got their own set of problems, and layering on 2 failed hydroxide projects to the world's greatest hard rock asset just makes it all the more a sad story for the lithium industry.
What does the future sort of hold for Albemarle? You've been vocal on your thoughts on a range of dynamics at play within the company, but in a downturn in a company with debt, the challenges can be pretty sort of pressing. How do you foresee the next few years playing out if we sort of stay where we are and are sort of perhaps plus 20, plus 30% bound on lithium prices?
Yeah, I think if you got plus 30%, the world would be a lot better place for Albemarle. But Albemarle's just made so many missteps, and just doing a podcast with them was, which I was surprised they actually did, but it was easier to arrange. I've never had more meetings to arrange a podcast than I did with Albemarle. Albemarle's has all the bureaucracy of a huge oil company, and it's a relatively small company. They hired too many people. They had VPs like a bank, and I continue to harp on it because I continue to get calls from people that leave the organization that want to bare their souls, and I like to listen to it. I don't think I think they need to clean out the leadership, and I think they need a new board, and I don't think that's about to happen. So you can't have a palsy-walsy board. You can't pay a guy that performed like Ken has the kind of money they've been paying him. It's a travesty as far as I'm concerned. But I don't really have feelings about it.
Yeah, it's hard pressed to argue with a lot of those perspectives.
No, they have the two of the best assets out there. How can they be where they are? Lack of good strategy, lack of good tactics, and lack of good leadership.
Culminates in pretty questionable capital allocation. I mean, how many of their growth projects or everything have just been like zero revenue generating decisions?
I felt like I was reading Mad Magazine, which I'm sure you guys don't know what that is, but it was a kind of a
yeah.
Mad Magazine kind of sets it all.
Familiar.
When they were gonna when they made the offer for Liontown, I thought this is straight out of Mad Magazine. I don't get it, and that's no pejorative on Liontown. I love the guys at Liontown. It's tough times with the way the market is, but I'm just saying that Gina benevolently saved Albemarle. That's probably the biggest irony of this decade in lithium.
Who would have thought it would be like that? Well, yeah, I mean, it's been wicked to for us to ask you the questions that we have about the space at the moment, Joe.
Go ahead, punish me. It's fine. I mean,
I echo what Joe just says. Like, we're of the ilk of certainly being more interested in commodities that are beaten up than they are when they're flying. Kind of, obviously the interest is far less from an audience perspective when commodities are beaten up than when they're flying. But for us individuals who look countercyclically, then yeah.
I am seeing in what I do. I'm seeing there's a lot more interest now, and I would just, you asked a question about India potentially investing. I think that's happening. I think what Exxon and Equinor are doing, they're not worried about the vagaries of lithium price the next 3 or 4 years. It doesn't matter to them. Mm-hmm. They can do what they want to do, and that's the positive side of the lithium story. But to be a junior lithium player right now is kind of like perpetual purgatory.
The saving grace is that the juniors flock with a sort of rear view type mirror, not a forward looking type outlook. So yeah, put whatever sort of weight into that as you will. I'd be curious to hear, Joe, one thing that we notice, given we're both in the podcast to sort of game to an extent. We definitely noticed the interest in lithium since we sort of started 2 years ago. Ebb and flow. It sort of was very high 2023, and it sort of trails off. Is that a kind of sentiment gauge, the viewership that you get in your podcast? Do you notice that sort of change substantially over, because you've done it a lot longer than we have?
Well, I spare my audience the need to view me. It's just my voice. But no, it's really funny. I mean, there's only one country on earth where I don't have a download, and that's Bhutan. And that's Spotify stats, 196 countries. I can predict the first 48 hours the podcast is up. Doesn't matter who I have on. I'm going to hit this number, this hour, and all the way through. I really haven't noticed much of a difference in listenership.
Interesting.
Yeah, it is. I have a loyal following that may just like to punish themselves every couple of weeks. I don't know.
There was a couple other assets and companies I wanted to get your quick takes on. So we spoke earlier in the week, or maybe last week, about Galan. They subtly announced that they bounced back an offer, and then latest rumors they're coming out for a capital raise. What's your take on the asset and on the kind of strategy?
They have been hamstrung by the market conditions, and I know they have a lot of disgruntled shareholders. I understand. A lot of people bought it at the top, and are unhappy. But if you look at what they're trying to do, it's a tough market. Um, I I don't I have a little money in Galan. I I'm a little underwater, not much, because didn't I bought it very late. But I like JP, and I'm very close to Daniel Jimenez. I think it's a good asset, and if I was going to sell it, I certainly wouldn't take the offer they got. But yeah, moving it forward is still a challenge.
Yeah, for sure. One of the other assets was Goulamina, and you spoke in a recent podcast about this sort of not being the kind of focus, in a sense that Ganfeng is prioritizing brines, but this is obviously a substantial project, and
Yeah.
we hear about it a lot less since the
Since
nature of the ownership has
since it's
moved
not
away.
Leo Lithium anymore. Yeah.
In a nutshell.
Yeah, I think Ganfeng, as well as they've done, has a lot of challenges because they have multiple good brine projects, but Ganfeng likes to talk about Ganfeng speed, and Ganfeng speed is certainly true inside China. Ganfeng speed slows down markedly outside of China, and I think the challenge they have now is that they have such a big portfolio that I think Goulamina, I would think, based on the capacities they have and the need for rock, that Goulamina gets the attention, but I would be surprised if they did additional significant hard rock before they get some of the brine assets online. And I mean, just look at their last quarter announcement. I mean, it's tough times even for Ganfeng.
Fascinating stuff, Joe. Appreciate you making the time and letting us pick your brain on every asset under the sun, and letting us sort of ponder what the West can do about catching up with the sort of bullet train that China is.
Well, when the bullet train leaves the station 10 years before the next bullet train, it is going to be hard to catch up. But I do have a belief that the U.S. will or North America will have a supply chain, but it's not going to be the scale of China. It's not. It's just it's going to be different. They picked the energy transition to focus on, and we continued to dither about battery packs and subsidies, and we are reaping what we sowed.
We'll keep paying attention, that's for sure. You when we reached out and asked for an interview, Joe, you said only if you can ask us a couple of questions at the end. So you've got the floor.
Gentlemen, you've been doing this now for 2 years?
2 years.
Give or take. Yep.
Each of you, what have you learned about yourself in the process of talking to people every day? And you'll answer that, and then I'll ask you a follow-up. It is rapid fire, boys.
Good thing we can edit and cut out the pause.
I, in the process of talking to people every day, what have I learned about myself? I reckon I've learned that I can change my mind more than I thought. I actually thought I was quite stubborn and would be very stuck in an opinion. But I think when you do speak to lots of different people, different expertise, I do have a capability to change my opinion, especially when I think the new person I met, the new perspective, is like, they come from a place of logic.
Yeah, it's a good question, Joe. The way I'd sort of answer it is I think it's the Dunning-Kruger effect, and I think about like where you are on the range of sort of knowing something about a particular kind of subject. And kind of bizarrely, I feel like we learn more every day about mining. And the gist of it is that you think you know a whole lot more when you're at the beginning of the journey. And every day for the last 2 years, we learn more, but I feel like I know less and less and less. And there's so many smart people out there that have such sort of nuanced and well thought out views on topics that we sort of dive into for a couple of days. And yeah, I think you sort of got to stay true to it and think you're learning more. But it's amazing how much is out there, and the knowledge that people sort of build up, like yourself, doing something for 20, 30 years. And yeah, to finish that piece off, we're pretty grateful that people do share their knowledge with us.
What have you learned about asking questions?
Say less.
Bingo.
I'm working on that one still, but yeah, I think it's like anything. Interviewing people is a skill, and you don't get good at it overnight, right? So you need to just work on it and work on it and work on it. And yeah, hopefully in 10, 20 years, maybe you'll be okay at it.
Yeah, no, I actually think I don't listen to you guys every day, but I do think generally speaking, you ask good questions, and that is a skill. And I think you come to it. But I do think you hit the nail on the head, though. It's talking less and listening more is probably the answer. And that was really what I had to learn when I started doing this.
It's hard when you like to talk, isn't it?
It isn't anymore. But yeah, it probably that's the big transition. And as a business, what have you found is the biggest challenge?
Oh.
I am loving the silence.
The biggest challenge is sort of staying true to the kind of mission you set out for when money gets involved, right? You start out, and we start out wanting to be independent and not take money from mining companies. And like, it's not that mining companies have come and offered us big cash, paychecks or anything like that, but it's all the stuff on the edges, and once you start kind of doing this and doing that, you get distracted, or maybe you get kind of sloppy on the fringes. And I think just staying true is the most important thing.
Yeah, I kind of build off that. It's focus. I would say it's like one thing someone else in media once said to us was it's much more important what you say no to than what you say yes to, and remembering to say no very, very often is a big challenge.
Well, when I met you guys, and I asked you what your day jobs were,
what did we say?
And you said, no, this is what we do. And I thought, wow, I felt like a shit, because I was like, I didn't mean it as an insult. I just,
yeah.
You hadn't been doing it very long. I figured you guys must like have jobs.
Yeah, I don't even know if it was paying the bills completely back then, Joe, but it was. We're all just a bit.
It was all pro bono.
We're all a bit delinquent and thought, well, we'll give it a crack, and if it doesn't work, it doesn't work. But we're still here 2 years later, which is a relief.
Well, give my regards to Matty, and the next time I'm in town, I'm coming calling for one of those Money of Mine shirts.
Please, mate.
Or hat.
Yeah, we'd love to have you in the studio. And
you know what? I'm going to invite Dwayne Sparks to be on this podcast with me when I'm in Perth.
Call out Dwayne.
Let's make it happen.
If anyone can make him come, it's you, Joe. We'd all welcome that opportunity. So let's hope it happens.
Well, I think it will. I have never met him either, but he seems like a swell guy.
I think we're gonna have to go to Katanning to meet him because he keeps running away.
Well, I'll go wherever.
Yeah.
I mean, this is my mission. This is like a pilgrimage halfway across the earth
To meet Dwayne.
seeking Dwayne Sparks. That can be the name of the episode. All right, guys.
Fantastic.
Well, I think you're done with me, so
Thank you so much, Joe. We're never done with you. The industry will never be done with you because you have been with it forever. So thank you so much for sharing your insight, your time, your knowledge of the past, present, and future. We really appreciate it.
You
Always
will
great
have
to chat, Joe.
you'll have a mention in my book.
Those pesky kids from Perth.
Nice alliteration. All right.
Cheers, Joe.
See ya.
Thank you very much, Mr Lithium, for connecting with us back in Australia. Good work, boys. Loved it.
Thanks to Joe. It was a pleasure to catch up with him and just take stock of everything in a market that has been pretty tumultuous over the last couple of years.
I see you went podcast onto you guys at the end.
He did. Yeah, he did.
It's the condition of doing the interview, Matty. Yeah. We'll extend that big thank you, Trav, to our awesome partners. Get your tickets for the GRX conference,
Mate, I'm going. I've got to book me tickets after this, actually.
May 20 to May 22nd in Brizzy.
Yeah, mate, can't wait. The Centre of Tech and Innovation. Discount codes on the show notes. I'll chuck the LinkedIn post up. Use the code, otherwise they'll think we're shit. Bloody mentioned in the show, MMS and Grounded. We've got bloody Samby Ground Sports, CRE Insurance, K-Drill, WA Water Wars, Quattro, KCA, Black Diamond Drilling Services, and Cross Boundary Energy. Hoodaroo.
Hooroo.
The information contained in this episode of Money of Mine is of general nature only and does not take into account the objectives, financial situation or needs of any particular person. Before making any investment decision, you should consult with your financial advisor and consider how appropriate the advice is to your objectives, financial situation and needs.